Hello and welcome to another edition of Electric Avenue's YouTube updates. I'm coming to you from a different location today, my music room, and I just thought that after the recent Apple Music 100 Best Albums of All Time list, I felt like I needed to kind of put in my 2 cents as to what I think the best albums of all time are. And I've had a lot of people saying, like, oh, we'd just be interested to hear what you have to say about it. So, what I'll say is, I really didn't like their list. I thought that there were a lot of strange placings, omissions. I don't know why certain things were way high on the list and other things completely off. I mean, I guess a lot of it is sort of perception and what maybe youth culture has a lot to kind of add to that right now. Um, I had not really any problem with the number one being a Lauryn Hill record or really her only record. Um, I don't think it should have been number one. I do think it should have been probably on the list. It's not on my list of greatest albums of all time, but it is for a lot of people. So I can sort of understand that. Um, Other things like Frank Ocean at number five, that's an album I've never been able to warm to at all. I don't know. I just find it sort of bereft of melody, and I'm a very like melody kind of person. Maybe I need to keep listening to it, keep trying. I thought it was fine that there were two Beyonce albums on the list. I just wish that Renaissance had been the one that got chosen and chosen the highest. Um, and there are a lot of things that are sort of like typical things. Uh, I suppose that the Beatles, something like Abbey Road is a pretty common choice, and can see where people love that as much as they do. I prefer a different Beatles album over that. Also, Michael Jackson's Thriller. There's no denying that Michael Jackson is one of the greatest artists of all time. I think Off the Wall is a better album, and I don't think either one of them should be in the top 20. It's sort of like when you start judging things on pure sales or kind of sales mixed with culture. And I'm not a huge hip hop fan, probably, and I have nothing against it, but I just don't go out of my way for it, and I like certain elements of that being mixed into other music. But so there's not going to be much hip hop on my list. I like I said, I think I'm a very melody driven person, and being a little older, came from a generation that was sort of a really big thing. Now, that being said, there's also no Sinatra on my list, and I would say like Only the Lonely is an incredible album. If I really wanted to go back and sort of pull in some of those kinds of influences, jazz, there's not a lot on my list, really. In fact, there's none in what I'm kind of discussing today. Um, but I do have kind of a soft spot in my heart for jazz, just as I do for classical. And I think what I'm kind of getting at here when I talk about the greatest albums that are were ever made, I'm sort of focusing a little more on the rock world, I suppose. I mean, obviously, something like Stevie Wonder Songs in the Key of Life is an amazing album, but I have certain issues with it. I think Isn't She Lovely goes on too long and has too much baby squealing. I think there's certain songs that don't hold up within it as much as others, but you could say that about almost any double album. But then throwing that 7 inch in there with those songs that I think are a little lesser kind of lessens it for me a little bit too. So anyway, let me just go through my list of my top 20. I kind of pulled my records and thought I'll just go through the list and share these with you, and you can decide whether you think I'm completely off base or not. And there are certain things that you'll say, well, now why didn't he choose that? I don't know. I think also growing up when I did, and then being a kid, like a teenager in the 80s, I was very kind of anti corporate rock. And there might actually be some corporate rock on this list, but there are things that I grew up listening to a lot early, like the Journeys and some Sticks, but ELO. I loved ELO, and I still love ELO. And some of those things could have made it on this list, but then I thought, better to focus on what I think are actually the best albums ever made for whatever reasons. So, and this is purely subjective, and in yours is going to be different. And I would love to see some of your choices in your comments. But anyway, or your lists. My number 20, Radiohead, OK Computer. I mean, it's so hard picking a Radiohead album, really, because 80% of them are incredible classics, and this is the OK Not OK version that adds the third record with all the sort of B-sides and outtake stuff. And actually, I like this even more because I think some of those songs are as good as the ones that made it to the album. I think my reason for putting this on the list to over some of the other albums is a little bit layered in the sense that I remember the Bends, when the album before this, when that came out, being pretty impressed with how much of a leap they took artistically over the first record. And then this one was like a massive leap. When I first heard Paranoid Android, it's kind of hard to. I mean, I suppose that kids now, it's sort of like, when you hear something for the first time and it blows you away, you never forget it. And that's sort of my feeling with Paranoid Android from that album. What an incredible guitar performance from Johnny Greenwood and the band, and all the time shifts, and that's pulling back to like progressive rock and oh, I don't know. There's a certain amount of Pink Floyd influence in there too. I mean, people always call them like, 90s answer to Pink Floyd or whatever. Ironically, there is no Pink Floyd on my list. And I don't have anything against them. Those albums, I really like Wish You Were Here, Animals, Dark Side, The Wall a little less, but, those albums are very incredible, like, artistic statements. Maybe they just didn't resonate with me as much as Radiohead, since I'm from that era, I suppose. Plus, I think sometimes we focus a little bit too. Here's a comment that I really do want to bring up. I think we focus a little bit too much on what was the originator, what was the first. And you could say that about several artists, whether it be the Beatles or Kraftwerk in electronic music, or I don't know, Grandmaster Flash in hip hop, or whatever it is. And I think a lot of times we get a little stuck on trying to be so purist about, well, you didn't pick the first one or the big one that, which I just sort of was talking about. That's a third Radiohead album. Nirvana is another, sort of like the explosion of Nevermind and all that. And sometimes I think albums that came later were much better, or not much better, but maybe better because they took what they learned from everything and sort of built on it. And so don't be offended if, like, I don't choose like the first or whatever. So, all right. My second choice at number 19 is Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Abattoir Blues, and The Lyre of Orpheus. Now, Nick Cave is a very unique performer, and I would say not for everybody. He's sort of like the gothic Johnny Cash of my era, or Bob Dylan, sort of a mix of those kind of guys, and has a very sort of like early on he was sort of like very vampiric and whatever, but he kind of developed his style over the years and worked in like sort of kind of sounds of like alternative rock, yes, but sort of chamber rock, chamber pop, gospel music, a lot of different things. So at times on this, right, it's a double album, and the quality of the songwriting and the performances are just incredible. And at times he comes off as like a fiery sort of preacher man gone wild. And then, of course, there's anthemic songs like There She Goes, My Beautiful World, which kind of has a sort of a jubilant feel, even though it's kind of a sort of like what's happening here. And then songs like "Oh Children," which got used in like the Harry Potter films, I think in the last one. Um, there's a and then there's sort of kind of pastoral type stuff too. I think for me this is like been the peak so far, where everything sort of came together. The songs like he had on Boatman's Call that were more reflective, like "Into My Arms," those kind of songs sort of appear here in sort of different kinds of ways too. And one of his children um, was unfortunately killed in a terrible accident, maybe 8 years ago. And I think his style completely changed because of that. And that was not that long after like this double album was made, and then things got a little more muted for a while. He's got a new one coming out in August that sounds like it could be more like this, something that's a little more variety. And I do like those slow albums, the sad ones, the more recent ones, but I have to be in the right mood for them. Abattoir Blues and The Lyre of Orpheus is a double record. That's my number 19. All right, I'm going to try and speed up because otherwise this will take forever. Number 18, Fiona Apple, When the Pawn. Fiona was somebody that I sort of really respected and was interested in musically when she first came onto the scene in the mid 90s. And I really liked the first album Title. And this is an album for me that was a total grower because the first time I heard it, I was like, well, those are brave choices. And I don't really hear like a hit single here or anything, you know? And it took a while for me to warm to it. And now I think it's like one of her best I mean, she only has 5 or 6 albums, but definitely near the top of the list for her. And out of all of the sort of female singer songwriters that came out in the 90s, she's the one that sort of sits at the top of my list now. I was, big Tori Amos fan. I also still love her, and people like Amy Mann and stuff who also worked with the same producer, John Bryan here. I think John Bryan was a great choice for Fiona as a collaborator and um, sort of a producer because he sort of brought out a lot of her jazzy textures, the kind of quirky piano chords that she uses. She's quirky piano chords, quirky sort of rhythmic elements, because there's not really like a lead guitar a lot of the time. And then a lot of rattling percussion and sort of the sounds that he would go on and use in his film scoring too. So the two of them together on this were really pretty incredible. So anyway, Fiona Apple at number 18. Let's see, number 17. Well, I am a kid of the 80s, and I was kind of into like goth and ambient stuff. And so this album is the apex, I think, of Cocteau Twins. The Cocteau Twins and their album Heaven or Las Vegas. And actually, I could have probably again picked 3 or 4. I love Bluebell Knoll is a wonderful album. Treasure is a wonderful album, and even some of their music work with This Mortal Coil. But this album in particular, I think everything again came together for them. It was sort of like they were still sort of like optimistic and sort of like enjoying the music creation experience and really thinking outside the box all the time. There's nobody else that really sounds like this band. And I think Simon Raymond's keyboard textures mixed with Robin Guthrie's guitar work, and then Elizabeth Fraser's angelic, incredible vocals on everything that she sang. And, it's funny because she does have like maybe 4 or 5 different characters living inside her vocal ability, and the way that she channels them and taking sort of wordless melodies, or they are not wordless, but they're very difficult to understand what she's saying. And that was all sort of intentional, I believe. But this is an incredible record. The title track is worth the price of it alone. But this features Ice Blink Luck and Frou Frou Foxes and Midsummer Fires. I mean, it's an artistic album for sure on the 4AD record label, who did such amazing work in the 80s, and still going strong. Let's see, number 16. Well, and now to bring down the room, David Bowie's Black Star, the last album he ever made, and what a sad and depressing record this is in a way, but also sort of moments of redemption here. Bowie knew that he was dying from inoperable cancer while he was making this. Died actually within a day or two of its release. And this came out, 2016, I believe? Early 2016. Or was it 2017? Now I'm losing my years. I think it was 2016. But anyway, so this features the first track, the title track, which is like a 10-minute sort of changing time signatures, musing on death and what is to come. This album features a lot of jazz influence. Donnie McCaslin, who's currently a pretty hot jazz player, does a lot of those sort of like wind wind instruments on this record. And sometimes it goes into sort of almost like free jazz, but it's still kind of reined in by Bowie and by the rock aspects of the album. Songs like "'Tis a Pity," "She's a Whore," "Girl Loves Me." I love "Dollar Days." I think that's a great song, and it ends with "I Can't Give Everything Away," which is just such a kind of a wistfully sad song, and it's sort of the perfect song for Bowie to end his career on. So I highly recommend Black Star. That's number 16. Number 15, again, this is an album that came out in the late 80s, and I kind of slept on it at the time and didn't really. I heard 1 or 2 songs from it and I thought, oh, well, that's really cool. But I didn't really like get into it until maybe like 15, 20 years ago at this point. And, uh, and then about 7 or 8 years ago, I had sort of a family member that went through a lot of health problems and was in the hospital and nearly died. And I think I've talked about this here before, so some of you know about this. But I would drive about an hour to and from the hospital every day. And one of the albums that I chose to play on all of those journeys all the time was this one, the Blue Nile's Hats. And this album, it's not very long. It's about maybe 35 to 40 minutes long. It was recorded originally in like 88, 89, something like that. It only has 7 songs, but they're all kind of long and have this sort of like beautifully textured, kind of meandering quality. And Paul Buchanan's voice is just stunningly soulful and very consoling. It has kind of a weary type tone. It doesn't sound maudlin at all, like sometimes maybe someone like Peter Gabriel, who I also love, gets a little more sad sounding. But it really, songs like the Downtown Lights and I don't even sort of the more upbeat songs like Headlights on a Parade. In fact, Taylor Swift on her new album, Tortured Poets Department, name checks in one of the songs. The first line is something about you sent me something about the Blue Nile, and then it said you sent me Downtown Lights. I haven't heard the Blue Nile in a while, or something like that. And that's what she's referring to, is this album, which is very hard to get. They keep reissuing it in like, here's like 200 or 300 copies, and then they're gone. So I'm really happy to have one of these. But this is my number 15, Hats by the Blue Nile. It's just such a touching album. Number 14. Man, I'm kind of stuck in sort of mid 80s here with a couple of these. But Talk Talk and their album Color of Spring. Again, this was a band that came out early 80s and sort of got lumped in with like bands like Duran Duran. They were on the same EMI record label. And by the mid 80s, they seemed to get, after It's My Life was a pretty big hit, which you might know that song from No Doubt covering it. They sort of got, I would say, almost jaded by the music business. And this album was sort of the first sign, I think, that they were going to take a real hard left turn into something else. This became, there are songs on here that are much more about like the sound, the texture of the sound. And I think they're pulling a lot from even things like King Crimson. One thing that's not on my list, but I think is great, is In the Court of the Crimson King. Really love that album. I just feel like there's parts of it that work better than others. And the same with Talk Talk. I think the last two albums in their career, Spirit of Eden and Laughing Stock, get very high praise, and they are incredible albums. They're like kind of avant-garde jazz rock records, but they're more ambient and kind of I don't know, at times they're almost like atonal in a way. They're more about the sound in the room and Mark Hollis's kind of interesting vocalizations. This album is when they still had a lot of melody. And like I said, I'm kind of a melody driven person. And I feel like they've struck the real high balance for me with this, which is why I say, oh, this is one of the best albums ever made, because certain songs like Living in Another World, Give It Up, Happiness is Easy, and especially the single Life is What You Make It, which I mean, one of the greatest songs ever written, I think. And you know, those songs are kind of like the driving type songs on here, with sort of the rockisms and the Hammond organ type sounding stuff. And then you get songs like Chameleon Day or April 5th or Time It's Time, where you know there's children's choirs and recorders being played, and it's much more like the cover art is also, I think, is important with a lot of these, and it's also kind of in this album evocative of what the sound of the album is. So anyway, I would say if you want to kind of like get into what Talk Talk sound like, this is a really good entry point for it. But yeah, such special music, I think. Anyway, and it's a shame that Mark Hollis is no longer with us, but died in his early 60s a few years ago. All right, number 13, Portishead, and the album Portishead, the self-titled. Some people say it's called P because it's got a big P behind the girl here. I think also this album cover is the perfect depiction of what this album sounds like. Most people would pick the album Dummy, which was their debut, and I think that that's an incredible, incredible album. I think that they took what they learned on that and made another incredible album. In fact, for me, this is just a notch higher, whereas I think a lot of people get sort of transfixed by the first album and the Sour Times song, which is just is such a like, oh my gosh, there's no, I mean, what other song sounds like that? and it was so copied after that by so many other people. This album, which came about 3 years after that one, they went through such painstaking process to try and degrade the quality of the tape by recording to some sort of an acetate, then taking that and destroying it somewhat or giving it a patina, driving over it, then recording it back to tape, and then overdubbing on that. And the layers of sort of degradation that they went through with the original tape on this to get a certain sound is what gives it its special quality. Also, besides the players who incredible sorts of noir jazz, keyboard textures, but string sections, sampling, guitar playing that's like just whacked out in a real cool, like sort of like spy kind of music way. But I would be remiss if I did not mention Beth Gibbons and her vocals on this album. Her new record is very kind of darkly English pastoral, but the whole thing feels like her. This album feels like each song has a different voice. It's like she brings something different to every single song vocally. And it starts with Cowboys, which is a very kind of strident, kind of a sinister type of song. Then followed by All Mine, which has this big brass section. And it's very like kind of 60s reminiscent, and it's kind of stagey and flashy. And then you get songs like Undenied that are just haunted kind of songs. Half Day Closing, incredibly like that's music for Halloween right there. The odd theremins and stuff going on. Only You was a really cool kind of hip hop influenced song with a lot of turntable scratching, and it's very kind of creepy. And watch the video for Only You if you want to be kind of like, what the hell is that? And then Western Eyes, another great closing song. Morning Air, Humming. This is such an incredible album. There's a reason that it's so high on my list. So it's hard picking from. I've been in this business, music business, selling records to people for 37 years. And to try and pick 20 albums is like, come on, and it's going to change, obviously, day to day. But I've been kind of like really thinking about this for the last at least couple weeks since that list came out. Okay, number 12, right? Portishead was 13. Number 12, Bjork, Homogenic. Another sort of album from 97, I think the same year as the Portishead record. There was something in the water in the 90s and the 80s too. You know, and again, maybe I'm just like focused on a certain era, but I would say for most people, their era is probably a little more young and teenage influenced. And by this time, I was already, probably in my late 20s maybe. Anyway, but this album, um I felt like Bjork had given us her stuff in the sugar cubes and then left that. And it's sort of like when you have like the belief that somebody is destined for greatness and you know that they can do it. um Her debut album, solo album, the one called Debut, was a great sort of beginning. And then Post, the second one, was even better. And this is the one that she just like artistically hit the top. And I think that it's such an interesting record musically and sonically. A lot of electronics on this. Some electronics are used, like in the first song Hunter, to sound almost like a march, which is very interesting. The way that Mark Bell, I think it's Mark Bell, produced or programmed some of the drumming. And then there's songs here, Bachelorette. That song is like the greatest James Bond song that was never used for a James Bond soundtrack. It is just this overwhelming, like, the string section, the orchestra is just fantastic, and then has a fantastic video to match that Michel Gondry directed. So, but songs like Yoga, they seem very like personal to her, like talking sort of. There's a lot of feeling of like Iceland coming through the electronics on this album, and I just feel like she really was hitting her stride. Um, Instrumentally, vocally, compositional. And also, this features the closing track, All Is Full of Love, and I actually sort of prefer the single version of that, so I would kind of hate to like dock this a point for that, but I mean, I do like this version too. It's just a completely different recording, so the other one has more of a beat on it. I have a feeling that someone at the label said, you know, we really like that song and we'd like to release it as a single, but can you re record it with drums? All right. So I guess that means number 11, Prince, Sign of the Times. So double album, and I could have put Songs in the Key of Life on here, like I said, but I think that Prince, for me, took the ideas of that and made them even bigger. And the fact that most of this album he did on his own, except for a little bit of help from Wendy and Lisa here and there. The only song that I think goes on a little too long is It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night, which is sort of a jam session. But it's a fun sort of party song. But songs like The Cross and Adore, I feel like Prince has like hit the top of his sort of the religious meets the rhythm and blues. There's something almost very spiritual about those songs. Things like I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man was a big hit. And so was You Got the Look, which is just a great song he and Sheena Easton did. If I Was Your Girlfriend. I think also, too, songs like Starfish and Coffee or The Ballad of Dorothy Parker. Those are kind of like they really show Prince's interest in people like Joni Mitchell and the psychedelic side of the Beatles. And so this album really, it's like all over the map as far as what he's bringing to the table. And it really does kind of reflect the times that it came out, and 1987, I believe. And it starts with the title track, Sign of the Times, which is a really great sort of social anthem. Sort of like in that era, also, we had like George Michael's Praying for Time, which was another great song. But number 11. All right, top 10. It's taking a while. David Sylvian, number 10, with Secrets of the Beehive. Some people will be like, I don't even know this record. Again, another 1987, 88 record, I believe. Sylvian was 87. He was the lead singer of the band Japan, which was kind of a Roxy Music inspired band, and then they in turn inspired Duran Duran. But he completely like turned away from that by the early 80s, got really into sort of quiet, sort of croony jazz rock, and sort of like very Nick Drake inspired. And but this is just an absolutely masterpiece type, unbelievable album. It's like I don't know how to even describe it. Ryuichi Sakamoto from Yellow Magic Orchestra just passed away recently. He plays piano all over this album, and it's some of the best piano playing on a rock sort of base. It's more of a folk rock album that I've heard, but not the typical, not like your Peter, Paul, and Mary folk, but more like British kind of folk, I suppose. But with a definite jazz influence, some really incredible acoustic guitar playing on this album. And he sort of did things with Robert Fripp. I mean, Sylvian has really sort of gotten around in the art circles. But yeah, and then some songs. It's kind of interesting how some songs like the opening track, September's only like a minute and a half long, but it says so much in just that minute and a half, kind of a piano instrumental type with some very poetic words. Maria is also kind of a short song. Then you get songs that are longer, like Orpheus, The Boy and the Gun. It's lots of storytelling, and then of course the last two songs, "Let the Happiness In," and which is just sort of a meditative kind of mantra. What a gorgeous song that is. And then "Waterfront," kind of a very sad ending song. I think the only thing that could have made this even better was well, they did go back on the CD and add "Forbidden Colors," but that song was actually a much earlier release, so I think it maybe would have distorted it, probably. But anyway, David Sylvian's Secrets of the Beehive. I always get that wrong. Secrets of the Beehive. I want to say Secrets from the Beehive. Number 9. Number 9. I think I've reviewed this on the channel here before. ABC Lexicon of Love. Trevor Horn produced this record from, he worked with Yes quite a bit. He was in the Buggles with Video Killed the Radio Star. Paired with these guys that were from Sheffield, England in the very early 80s, decided that they were going to come up with what turned out to be one of the best produced albums of all time. You get such a great playing from the group of players here. And then also you get Ann Dudley, who ended up in The Art of Noise also with Trevor Horn. But the strings that she arranged on this album, the piano and keyboards that she played, and Martin Fry's incredible vocals. I'm using the word incredible a lot today because that's the only way to describe all of these albums, but sort of a soul crooner, a white soul crooner from the north of England, very inspired by Motown and whatever, and Motown and also glam rock, and he's got kind of a soulful, muscular voice. But these songs, I think people are familiar with, like The Look of Love and Poison Arrow. They're sort of like big kind of pop records, but everything on this album sounds big and it never gets boring, and it's like every song is a winner. Every song could be a single. The lyrics are so smartly written, and the turns of phrase. I don't know. I mean, as many albums as I've heard Martin and ABC do after this, whether it was just him or with guys in the band, I still think this is like the best written album. It's almost like, you know, how when you're a kid and you're keeping journals and you're writing lyrics and stuff, and you finally get to put it out there and, like, you know, this is my artistic statement, and then you got to come up with the follow-up, and it might be good, but it's, you know, it's sort of hard when you've got years to sort of warm up to some of these things. All right, so number 8, Talking Heads and Remain in Light. And again, this is another album that I sort of came to late. This was released in 1980, and at the time I was really listening to, again, sort of like corporate whatever was on the radio. And other than Once in a Lifetime, I didn't hear really anything from this record until maybe like 3 or 4 years after it came out. And then I kind of like started playing it more, and then I thought, oh, this is really cool. And then I kind of just put it aside and said, oh yeah, that's a really great album. And then like about 20 years ago, I really started playing it again, and I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. And it's a mixture of many things. It's David Byrne and his like wild man vocals and interesting lyrics, very political. It's also like the rhythm that the band brings to these songs. I'm sorry, like You're My Friends. Tina Weymouth and Chris France on the rhythms, and Jerry Harrison, great guitar and keyboard work, and then Brian Eno basically being a de facto member of the band and producing this. I don't know. I mean, I don't. I some days I like speaking in tongues a lot. I almost like it better, and then Fear of Music is also a really great album. But I think this is where everything just really gelled for them. And yes, Once in a Lifetime was a hit, but I think the thing that strikes me about this album too is the way that it was set up as far as the running order. And I think if you really kind of like start piecing it apart, you realize that it sort of starts kind of mid tempo and then it gets faster and faster. And by the time you hit the third song, things are pretty manic. And then you get Once in a Lifetime, and then gradually the songs get slower until the last song, which I think is the Overload, is pretty much like kind of a dirge. And you're sort of feeling like I've just been taken on a very kind of apocalyptic sort of future of political kind of stuff. So great album, number 8. Number 7. See, I gotta have one by these guys. The Beatles, Revolver. I could have picked at least 4 or 5 different Beatles albums, but really this one, song for song, is my favorite. I think it's really when they started playing a lot in the studio. They did some with Rubber Soul and other things, but this one they really went all in. And then, of course, songs like Tomorrow Never Knows with the background or backwards stuff going on. I do prefer the British version. And I will say also, the first version I heard was the British version. Again, I did not listen to this album until, oh, how about maybe 15 years almost after I was selling records. So what, like 2000? It was pretty late. It's one of those things that I'm sure you have records like this where you're like, oh, I know it exists there. I'll get to it someday. It's like it took me a long time to listen to some Zeppelin records too. Not on my list, but there's like Physical Graffiti is really great. But yeah, but it took me a really long time. And when I finally listened to it, I'm like, okay, so it's got Eleanor Rigby, you're fine. Oh, I'm Only Sleeping. What an incredible song. Here, There, and Everywhere is probably my favorite Beatles song. And I think that it really like gets to my soul when I hear that. And then you get fun stuff like Yellow Submarine, which is a little goofy. And Your Bird Can Sing has a great melody. Good Day Sunshine has a great melody. Got to Get You into My Life. See, I told you I'm a melody person, and this totally won me over, which is probably the reason that like the White Album is not ranked as high for me. Abbey Road has a lot of good melodies, but Maxwell Silver hammers a little bit. It's a little on the goofy side. I know there are going to be people saying that's a great song. Okay, let's see. Number 6, David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust, Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, and Spiders from Mars. Um, what can be said about this album that hasn't been said already? This is my second Bowie on the list if you weren't paying attention. Every song on this album is great. I think the only one that might be like a little okay is It Ain't Easy, and that one really I warmed to, and I know I love it. But I mean, it starts with 5 years and it ends with Rock and Roll Suicide. What a perfect album just in those 2 songs. But then all of these other songs in here: Moon Age Daydream, Starman, A Star, Ziggy Stardust, and then throw Suffragette City in on top of it. And I'm a huge fan of Soul Love. I think that's a really great kind of like just easygoing kind of R&B type song. I mean, it's glam rock, but there's soul, and Bowie is just like he really, really. I mean, I love Hunky Dory too, that came before this, and Man Who Sold the World, but this seems like the obvious choice, so I'll go with it. Number 5, The Cure, Disintegration. Uh, Talk about a mood piece from beginning to end. You got over an hour of music, and other than maybe the singles like Lullaby and Love Song, nothing really necessarily sticks out. Everything feels so organic the way it's laid out, and it just plays like one sort of continuous mood piece. And um uh, I love Kiss Me, the album that came before this, and Head on the Door, great too, a little bit shorter. Um, but this is really like probably their top record for me. Fascination Street's also on here. Pictures of You. I mean, I think just maybe for that one song, even, you could say this is like a top 10 album. So the lyrics, Robert singing, Robert Smith, uh, the voice of a generation of kids that felt sort of like, is there anyone speaking for me? And uh, speechless. Speechless. Okay, number four. Second time for this guy. Prince, Purple Rain. Prince and the Revolution. If anyone were to ask me, what album do you think is an album that has absolutely no wasted space and you would recommend it to somebody, I would say this one. I don't think there's a second wasted on this album anywhere. Prince really did edit this down to feature magic through the entire thing. And whether it be When Doves Cry, which that was the first song that I heard, or probably anybody heard from this, because that was the first single. But him do after doing things like 1999 and Delirious, then to put out When Doves Cry, where he removed the bass from it, we get that incredible guitar lick at the beginning, and then there's all this like cool synth work, and the ending with the crazy sped up keyboard and the layered vocals. I mean, uh, Let's Go Crazy was the second single, and you're like, holy crap. I mean, the guitar at the end of that and the way that the band is so tight, it's just and then to see the movie on top of it. I mean, there's a reason that this thing sold like what, 25 million copies. I don't know. It's a lot of records. And you got to see the movie now too, people. I mean, I think a lot of people talk about this album and how great it is, and then they say, man, I never saw the movie. I'm like, what are you talking about? Go see the movie. It should be required. Now, that being said, there are some things in it that are very misogynistic that were probably considered funny by 80s standards and now are a little bit much. So just don't be alarmed. I did warn you. So, all right, number three. I'm a top three. I'm getting there. Fiona Apple. Again, second album for her in the top 20. Fetch the Bolt Cutters. This is her album from just 4 years ago. Hard to believe it's been that long, right? The first year of the pandemic. This was one of the first big albums that came out during the pandemic. It sounded like it was recorded during a pandemic. It was not. It was recorded before that. But very intimate kind of record. She grew so much vocally and artistically, even from those first couple records, even from When the Pawn. I think she kind of is not working with John Bryan anymore, which sort of unfortunate, but I think that it also showed that she could grow as an artist and she didn't really have to be tethered to a single producer. The songs are quirky and interesting, and she does weird things with her voice, and it sounds like it was recorded at home. You hear banging on like tea kettles and like dogs barking in the background or dogs, but it still has that kind of warm, lived in feel. And it's sort of like the telling. I think that this is like as many breakup records as like Taylor Swift has made. This one is so like gut wrenching as far as like, she just really is trying to figure this guy out, and he's not giving her anything, and he's in another relationship with someone else. And then there's a divulging of something horrifying that happened to her sort of late in this album, and the way that it's described on the song, which song was it? I think it's For He. where she's for her. Sorry, it's not cosmonauts. I think it's for her. But yeah, it's very kind of shocking, and you're like, it's emotionally draining. It's just a very emotional record. It's not for everybody. Not everyone's gonna get it, but I do think artistically and with what she's trying to say with it and the music sort of aspect and the way that it was pulled together, some of it sounds like, how did they even put this together? I could say that about like Black Midi as another band, or yeah, sometimes who's the other one? Black Country New Road. Some of their stuff's a little interesting too. So I don't know. I'm just kind of pulling from, but that one's only 4 years old. So sorry for putting such a new record in there. Number two, a Bjork again, Vespertine. Oh, this album is like, I want to hear this when the pearly gates open for me. The sort of the outpouring of like the gorgeousness of the orchestras and the vocals. Oh my god, the layers of choirs on this album, the cool sort of like glitchy synthetic work with the synths and the drums, drum machines, and I mean, and then all the bells, the wintry sounds. Even a song like Frosty, which is just like an instrumental, is just incredible. But this has some really, really great work. Pagan poetry. What a intimate, again, outpouring of love. I mean, I think the women are killing it on my list. I'm sorry, guys. But Fiona, now Bjork. Anyway, so guess what's going to be number one? Oh gosh, could you tell? Kate Bush, Hounds of Love. I actually toiled over this choice for a while. I kept thinking like I need to put Prince at number one and whatever, but I was thinking about, what she did as far as like coming from the sort of girly aspects of her early couple records, Kick Inside, and they're great albums, but I think that really by the time she got to this, which was her fifth album, the artistic side of her was just unstoppable. And using the Fairlight, which was sort of a new keyboard technology at the time, being able to use that as a sampling tool, being able to sort of tell the stories with the aid of that, as far as like giving you this cinematic sound effects. And side A is great, great singles, Running Up That Hill, everyone sort of knows now, but the title track, The Big Sky, Cloud Busting, and then side two, The Ninth Wave, and all of its great sort of like um, interesting. The songs have so much variety, and she's not afraid to go there and be weird. And I really appreciate that in a world where we have a lot of homogenization. Um, and there are a lot of artists that are out there willing to do that now. So I was going to just read off a few extras that you didn't see from just below on the list. I had number 21, Sufjan Stevens, Carrie and Lowell. Number 22, Scott Walker, Scott 3. Number 23, The Dusk. Check that out. They're coming back this fall. 24, Depeche Mode, Violator. 25, Saint Etienne's Words and Music. And that album might be a surprise for some people. And I think that album, I love it so much because it's all about the love of writing music and the love of hearing music and enjoying music. And it's very well put together in a way that kind of all the songs are really balanced with each other. And for a modern pop record, I think it's very well recorded. 26th, Suede, London Suede, Dogman Star. That's sort of like their Pink Floydian kind of, I suppose, statement. There's a lot of great glam rocky songs on that album, like Bowie-esque, but then there's also some really touching ballads, like orchestral ballads and stuff. I really love that album. 27, Tom Waits' Rain Dogs. 28, Kraftwerk's Computer World. 29, David Bowie's Hunky Dory. And 30, Daft Punk's Discovery. And so I did like another 10. Stevie Wonder's on there. So anyway, thanks, guys. I know that went on a little bit long, but I think it's interesting to sort of hear what other people's feelings are about these things. And I think what I'm kind of trying to say is sometimes when you look at a list like that, I think that we get so accustomed to seeing the same stuff on the list all the time that, and then when something is on there that doesn't feel like it belongs on there, it's like, why is this here? So I think also because everybody has a different opinion, it's going to be kind of different every time. So you kind of have to just accept that someone else felt differently than you. It is weird seeing the Velvet Underground way down at number 60 on that list because usually that's something that's higher. And again, I think as time goes on, some of those albums that we've been accustomed to, always being told, Blonde on Blonde by Bob Dylan has got to be at the top of the list or whatever, and great albums. But over time, I think we take those things that people like Dylan came up with or whatever, and then they get sort of mutated into like other artists' work. And sometimes they can be expanded and be made even better, or maybe they have a different aspect that they're bringing to it. More modern in some ways, which is not always better, but sometimes it can be. There's just many things that can go into that. So, anyway, hey, thanks for joining me. Thanks for watching. I know this is kind of long, but I can talk a lot. All right. Take care. Peace. Thanks. Thanks for watching. And see you soon.